This is the Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life.
Today we're going into a moment in legal history where a single Supreme Court decision ended up defining freedom and equality for literally generations of Americans.
That's right.
We are plunging headfirst into Plessy v. Ferguson, the 1896 case that became really the legal cornerstone of racial segregation in the United States.
And we have to start with the stakes here, because this wasn't just some, small administrative dispute. This case was a direct challenge to the whole meaning of the 13th and 14th Amendments.
The very amendments that were supposed to guarantee freedom after the Civil War.
Exactly. The pillars of it. The question was, do these amendments actually guarantee equal treatment in public life? That's what was on the line.
And the outcome was, well, it was monumental. The state of Louisiana won. It affirmed its power to make laws based on race.
And the people seeking true racial equality, they lost. They lost in a huge way, locked in a legal standard that would define American life for more than half a century.
It really put the entire promise of that post-Civil War era on, life support.
It did. So if you take just one thing away from our deep dive today, let it be this. The Supreme Court ruled that states could lawfully mandate separate but equal accommodations for white and colored citizens.
And that this was just a valid exercise of state power.
That's it. That one sentence basically enshrined segregation into federal constitutional law.
Okay, so let's unpack this as a story, because it really is one. Let's set the scene. We're in Louisiana, 1896.
Right. And states all across the South are furiously passing these laws to enforce racial separation. They're trying to find ways around the spirit of those new amendments.
And that's the world that Homer Plessy steps into.
And Plessy himself is so key to this. Our sources describe him as 7/8 Caucasian and 1/8 African.
So visually, he could have passed for white.
He could have. And that's what makes it so important. His choice to declare himself colored and challenge the law was a deliberate act of civil disobedience. It was all orchestrated by a citizens committee trying to test this very law.
The conflict then was set up almost like a play. Plessy gets on an East Louisiana railway train. He intentionally sits in the coach for white passengers.
And when the conductor comes by and tells him to move to the car for colored passengers, he refuses. He forces the confrontation.
Which escalated immediately.
Oh, yeah. He is forcibly thrown off the train with help from the police, arrested, and then jailed for violating Louisiana's 1890 Act No. 111. This was always meant to be a major legal showdown.
Let's talk about that law for a second. Act 111. It was very specific, wasn't it?
Meticulous. It legally forced railway officers to assign people to coaches based on their race. It hit passengers with penalties if they sat in the wrong car.
And it even protected the railroad from being sued if they refused to carry someone who broke the rule.
It was a completely buttoned-up system for legal segregation. And Plessy's argument was simple. He said, this state law goes against the 13th and 14th Amendments.
Yeah.
He was basically saying, this law is making me less than a full citizen.
Okay, so let's pivot to that legal argument. He banked his whole case on these two huge post-Civil War amendments. How on earth did the Supreme Court manage to rule against him?
They did it by interpreting those amendments very, very narrowly. It's like they took a scalpel to them. They started with the 13th Amendment, the one that abolished slavery.
Right. Plessy's lawyers argued that being forced to move just because of your race was a badge of servitude, a kind of leftover from slavery.
Which feels like a powerful argument,
Yeah.
Being legally branded and forced into a separate, inferior space.
Yeah.
It certainly sounds like a remnant of that old system.
So how did the court get around that?
They said the 13th Amendment's only goal was to abolish slavery as it literally existed.
Right.
The actual ownership of a person. They drew a very hard line.
So if you're not physically in chains, the 13th Amendment doesn't apply, even if the state is enforcing a racial caste system.
That's essentially what they said, yes. They argued that requiring separate train cars didn't impose slavery or involuntary servitude. It might be discrimination, but it wasn't servitude. And so no conflict with the 13th Amendment.
That feels like a huge leap of logic. But okay, what about the big one, the 14th Amendment? Equal protection. How did they neutralize that?
Well, they admitted that, yes, the 14th Amendment does enforce citizenship and legal equality. But, and this is the most critical move they made, they immediately said it was never intended to get rid of all distinctions based on color.
And here's where they introduced that idea of legal equality versus, what was it? social equality.
Exactly. The majority argued the amendment wasn't designed to enforce social equality or to force the races to mix against what they called societal customs.
So the law can guarantee your right to, say, own property, but it can't guarantee you the right to sit where you want on a train.
That's the distinction they made. Political and civil rights were protected, but social arrangements were left up to the states to regulate. They even pointed to segregated schools and theaters as examples of this being totally normal and within a state's power.
It's like the court was saying, we can protect your rights on paper, but we won't protect your dignity in public.
That is the profound implication, yes.
So if the amendments couldn't help Plessy, the majority must have built their case on something else. What was their main justification? I know it had to do with police power.
That was the foundation, state police power. It's this broad, inherent authority that states have to pass laws for public safety, welfare, and order.
Okay. But how does forcing racial separation on a train count as a public safety measure?
They called it a reasonable regulation. The justification was that separation was needed to keep public peace and order by respecting local social customs. In their view, keeping the races apart would prevent racial friction and conflict.
Wait, so the law, which is clearly designed to enforce a racial hierarchy, is reframed as just keeping the peace.
And they said that courts should defer to the state legislature's judgment on what's reasonable.
But what about the argument that this law obviously imposes a badge of inferiority? How did they just...
This is where the reasoning gets truly staggering. The court flat out rejected that argument. It claimed any feeling of inferiority was not caused by the law itself.
So where did it come from then?
They said it was a construction and interpretation placed upon the law by the colored race.
You're kidding. They're blaming the victim. They're saying, if you feel inferior, that's on you, not a consequence of our law.
Precisely. They said social prejudices can't be fixed by laws, and forcing people to mix would just make things worse. Equal rights didn't mean identical treatment.
It's just wild. But we know it wasn't a unanimous decision. There was a famous dissent from Justice Harlan.
A powerful one. Harlan's dissent is one of the most famous in history because he just called it like he saw it. He said the Louisiana law was obviously unconstitutional.
He saw it as a violation of personal freedom.
A grave violation. He said its purpose was not to keep order, but to create and perpetuate racial discrimination. Pure and simple.
And he's the one who used that famous phrase, the Colorblind Constitution.
Yes. He wrote, "Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. In respect of civil rights, all citizens are equal before the law." It was direct rebuttal to the majority's whole social versus legal equality argument.
Which shows that even back then, in 1896, there were people at the highest level who saw exactly what this was.
Absolutely. And his dissent became the blueprint for overturning this decision.
The court affirms the Louisiana law. What does that mean for the country?
It means the Supreme Court officially gives its blessing to state-mandated segregation. It establishes the separate but equal doctrine, which then spreads like wildfire far beyond just train cars.
So why is it so vital that we still talk about and understand this case today? What does it all mean?
We talk about it because Plessy gave the whole Jim Crow system its legal and constitutional cover. It justified decades of systemic segregation in schools, hospitals, parks, everywhere. It was the legal architecture for institutionalized racism.
And of course, in reality, separate was almost never equal.
Almost never. It created huge disparities in everything for decades. And even though Plessy was eventually overturned, that core tension it deals with, the fight between what a law says and what social prejudice does, that's still with us.
It's still incredibly relevant.
Immensely. We still argue today about how the law should handle discrimination and ensure real equal protection.
It's just such a powerful lesson. A court decision based on this flimsy distinction between legal and social equality shaped the lives of millions for generations. Plessy v. Ferguson made racial separation the law of the land.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to take away. The 1896 court said social equality couldn't be forced by law, that had to happen naturally. But think about what that really means. By refusing to enforce the 14th Amendment fully, the government used its constitutional power to legitimize social prejudice. It leaves us with a question that we still face today. What's the real difference between a law being technically constitutional and the profound, enduring human cost it inflicts on the people it deems unequal?
You've been listening to The Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the next case.